Thank you so much. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today to Developing Confidence and Independence. This is a session that's been part of the Mentoring Up program, which is a longer 6-session program we developed at Graduate Studies to learn about how you can play a role as a mentee in your mentoring relationships and skills to sort of manage up with faculty, mentors, and gain skills as mentees. So this quarter, we broke these sessions up into different Zoom options, just trying to reach more folks, make it accessible, and a little less of a time commitment. So this is one of those sessions. I am Elizabeth Sturdy, Director of Mentoring and Academic Success Initiatives. I work at Grad Studies. I lead this program as well as a faculty mentor training program called the Graduate Mentoring Initiative, where we're training faculty on how to mentor grad students and postdocs, as well as a variety of workshops and resources related to mentoring in graduate school. So we're going to be talking about confidence, or is also known as self-efficacy. So one reason I didn't put this in the title is, what is self-efficacy? It's not a term we always use, but we're going to be talking about it today because it is the confidence that you have in yourself to do a task or a skill. And so having self-efficacy is going to help you be successful as grad students and postdocs. And so knowing more about what you need, what works best for you, and what makes you feel confident is really helpful for your success. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, as well as how to maintain confidence in face of feedback, particularly criticism, and strategies to gain independence as well. So we'll do that at the end. So I want to start out and just have you think about grad school so far, or your postdoc position so far, or if you're new to grad school, maybe you'll think about undergrad school. Think about something that's happened to make you feel more or less confident, particularly related to research, something that really helped you. It could be people, mentors, and then maybe think about something you're not feeling so confident about on the horizon in the future. You can just sort of scribble this down or think in your head. We're going to come back to it later in the session. And I'd love if you could start adding to the chat just things that helped you feel more confident in the past, so we could just see some of those strategies. So I see presentations, getting feedback that I'm good at something, like you're a good writer, positive feedback from mentors. Any other examples? So one is sort of very much the act of doing something, probably over and over. The other two were sort of words of encouragement, experience as well. So yeah, kind of this doing, but also getting feedback. Yeah, reframing low confidence moments into a bigger picture, comparing them to other moments of success, doing a research activity, doing data analysis, talking to growers. So kind of the act of doing, a lot of doing the research, but also some reframing, changing of perspective, thinking about moments of success, reflecting on sort of small wins. Wonderful. So these are going to very much relate to what we're going to talk about in a bit in terms of strategies for confidence. So again, self-efficacy is this confidence that you can do this. You know, you're all here. You were either admitted to grad school or given a postdoc position. And so everyone that admitted you or hired you believes that you can do this. And so just having that confidence for yourself as well. I love this picture because it's a student graduating. This was back in Merak, so it's not Walker Hall, but I love the joy in this picture. And I'm ringing the bell for the student because they've just graduated. And so every time a PhD student graduates, we ring the bell if they come in person and announce their degree. So this is sort of the end goal, I think, for a lot of you. And we have upgraded our bell. It's much bigger in Walker Hall. But again, there's so much joy reflected in this picture, so I've kept it. So the belief that you can do this, you can graduate, you can finish your postdoc position and get the next position, sort of achieve those big goals that you have for yourself. So some examples of what self-efficacy sort of looks like is thinking that you can achieve the goals that you've set for yourself, thinking that when something is difficult, that you will be able to make some progress, that you're not feeling too stuck in being discouraged, that your ability will grow and that it will take effort, but that it can grow, that you're going to be able to obtain these outcomes and overcome challenges. We acknowledge that there are plenty of challenges in graduate school and a postdoc position. Absolutely, it's very challenging, but having some self-efficacy that you're going to be capable of navigating those. So some trends is for those that have more developed self-efficacy, they tend to view challenges as things that they can master. They tend to get deeply interested in what they're doing and very committed. They recover a little faster from setbacks or disappointments, and they develop a really strong identity as a scholar. And this is something that keeps coming up in a lot of the readings that I do, is that when you feel like your goals are a part of your identity, it's very much easier to develop habits and self-efficacy that you will be successful if it's tied to your identity. So for example, saying like, I am a good writer, which came up in the chat. People that develop that identity are more likely to write on a daily basis or think that they can get published, things like that, if it's kind of associated more with their identity. People who have less developed self-efficacy, they might avoid challenges because they think it's beyond their abilities. And then everything can feel really personal. And there can be a lot of fear about negative outcomes. So this, of course, leads to a lot of loss of confidence in oneself. And it can feel very personal about kind of who you are. So speaking of identity, like how it might feel to feel like you are a bad writer and to have that identity. That can be something that's very difficult to overcome in order to write. So it can lead to a lot of internalization and can make it really hard to develop those habits and be successful. I want to talk about two external factors that can happen when we talk about confidence. So there's bias about what confidence looks like. So I wanted to acknowledge that. So externally, people are going to perceive confidence in different ways. So we're before talking a lot about the internal experience of confidence, but externally, people might be viewing others as confident or not confident. And they're doing it a lot on sort of biased traits of how people classify confidence. And a lot of times, people who are more domineering, more assertive, talk a lot, they tend to be considered more confident. Sometimes those that are more soft-spoken or kind of taking their time to respond or not as verbose can be labeled as not confident. And I hear this from particularly women all the time who share that they're getting feedback that they're not confident. And so one way to sort of push back if you have the bandwidth or kind of question this, if you truly internally feel confident, is sort of like, how do you define confidence? What are the traits or behaviors that are making you think I'm not confident? Those are some of the ways to sort of clarify and push back a little bit on this bias, because you can be confident and not be the loudest person in the room. And it's important to know that what is perceived as confidence is not always competence. So that's often like a false correlation that we can see in different working environments. And so just being mindful that some of those, domineering, verbose behaviors does not always equate to competence. The other thing that can be happening externally around us can create imposter feelings. So imposter feelings, sometimes called imposter syndrome. And I think that really sort of makes it sound like a diagnosis. So a lot of us have stopped using that term. Imposter feelings are feelings that one doesn't belong or you're not good enough. And so, of course, people that are having those feelings can experience lower self-efficacy. But what they found in the latest discussions of imposter feelings is that a lot of them are created by external factors. And I found this so empowering for my own imposter feelings to just recognize that this is not something that is an individual weakness or something wrong with the individual that they need to work on or address. This is an individual picking up on messages, usually implicit, but sometimes explicit, that one doesn't belong or you're not good enough. So these are things that we can face every day. It's impacting women, people of color, and first generation grad students, and is seen a lot in higher education. And so I hope that is helpful in terms of thinking, if you are sort of picking up on these messages, that there's not something internally kind of wrong with you that you need to address, that you are being very perceptive to sort of the environment around you and some messages that are getting pushed around us in our culture all the time. And so these are other factors that I wanted to address before we jump into sources of self-efficacy that could be impacting your self-efficacy. Next, we're going to talk about sort of how can you develop self-efficacy for yourself and even maybe your mentees, for those of you mentoring yourselves. So there are 4 sources of self-efficacy. And so these are some ideas of how you could use different strategies to develop confidence. And there are going to be things that work better for you than others. This is kind of reminds me a bit of like learning styles. Like we're all going to have a preference or things that we like more than others. And then it could also depend on sort of what your goal is, what might be most relevant. So we're going to have time to sort of think about what strategy might work best for what goal. And you might need to try different ones for different things. So we're going to talk about mastery experiences, social modeling, social persuasion, and emotional and physiological responses. We're going to go through them one by one. So mastery experiences. This is the act of doing. So I saw a lot of that in the chat of just doing those presentations, doing the research. What were the other examples? You know, doing the writing, doing the data analysis. This is doing the tasks sort of over and over until you get better. One thing to keep in mind though is that you want to make it achievable. So I think like if someone's learning to drive, we wouldn't send them on I-80 on a Friday afternoon for their first driving experience, right? Like that could be traumatizing. So that's sort of why it's like, don't do something so big that it could actually undermine self-efficacy. Try to think of something that would be manageable. Again, start building those small wins. So you're building confidence, things that are achievable, things that you're going to succeed at. Start building up from there. And doing a lot of repetition, of course, helps. So for example, if we're going to talk about a presentation, this would be like giving a presentation. And maybe this would be to a small group as the first try. Next one's social modeling. So this is watching other people do the tasks that you would like to do. So this would be watching someone give a presentation, maybe going to hear a professor, visiting scholar speak that you really admire. So it could be sort of aspirational, or it could be watching like a peer who's, you know, a year or two ahead of you do it. And kind of depending on what sounds like it would be helpful. A lot of folks do this with peer mentoring. So a lot of folks will work with someone with a little more experience on something, and they will watch them or do a task together where they can observe and someone working to learn a new skill. This is really helpful too, I think, if you're working with undergraduate students, and you're probably already using this a lot in research. The next is social persuasion. So that again came up in the chat. So sort of that positive feedback or encouragement. So people can be persuaded to believe that they have the skills and abilities to succeed. So verbal encouragement can overcome self-doubt and really help people achieve tasks. So this could be maybe having a mentoring conversation where you share with your mentor, you're feeling very nervous, and asking for encouragement or having encouragement from your mentor about how prepared you are and what a great presenter you are and everyone liked your last talk, and sort of being that cheerleader voice is often what I think of it as for you, to maybe counteract some of those doubts or critical thoughts that you might be having about yourself. The last one's emotional and physiological responses. And this is really thinking about the moods, emotional states, kind of your physical health or your stress levels related to this task. And so this is about seeking out resources for yourself to sort of stabilize your nerves, your stress, but to also address your well-being. It's very, very difficult to have confidence or self-efficacy if you are not doing well. So well-being is a really critical component of having confidence. Being able to regulate emotions takes a lot of emotional labor, and you have to have sort of gas in your tank to do that. And so this is about thinking about maybe there's different resources that you would need that can help you. So maybe it's, seeking out therapy. Maybe it's being active, physically active, exercising. Could be filling in like self-care, like making sure you're eating, making sure you're taking moments to relax, seeing friends. So this is going to be very individualized to what works best for you. That's sort of why we were like, meditate, listen to music, fill in the blank here before a presentation to feel more confident. Many of us have different strategies that we use if we're feeling nerves before a presentation, for example. And so this will be very unique to who you are. You can definitely ask others what they do and get good ideas, but it would be also really knowing what works best for you or where you're struggling, and where a good resource might be for that. So I want you to look at this handout that Kevin's going to put in the chat, and thank you to Kevin for helping me today, which really outlines these sources. So you're going to get these handouts and these slides to take with you. And this handout just goes over sort of the 4 sources that I just went over. Think about what would work well for you and what might not. And think about what you came up with in the reflection earlier when I said, try and think of a goal that you have on the horizon that you might not be feeling super confident about. Would any of these sources help you there? And what that you came up with and that you shared in the chat were the sources that have worked for you in the past? Is there one that seems to be kind of the most helpful to you? So thinking about a source that will help you for your upcoming goal, could you just put the name of the source in the chat? So maybe it's mastery or social persuasion. Let's just put in the chat, which one do you think you need for your future goal? I see social modeling. So we've already thinking, oh, there's someone I want to work with where I can sort of watch or observe them on how to do something. Mastery and social persuasion. So doing, but also getting encouragement, another mastery. Maybe about 1 more minute to add to the chat. All right, well, we're gonna break a goal down even more. You can use that future goal, or you can think of something else, but we're going to use another handout that Kevin's gonna put in the chat. It's using sort of a stair analogy. So there is a staircase that's in this handout, which you're going to put your task at the top of the stairs, and you're going to practice breaking down into smaller steps all the things that you need to do to get to that bigger goal. So maybe not putting graduate unless you're really close, but something like a task you have next quarter, maybe, or a bigger assignment, or something you want to publish, something like that, and break it down into smaller steps. You can fill in the PDF. It's fillable on page 2, or you can feel free to sort of write on a piece of paper, open a Google Doc or Word doc if you prefer, to sort of start taking notes on how you would break down this goal. I'm going to give you about 4 minutes to do that. There is an example on page 1 and here on the slide of like what that looks like if you need ideas. And I'm going to go on mute and give you a few minutes to work on this. Now we're going to put, thank you. We're going to put you in small groups. And Kevin's going to also put these questions in the chat so you can see them. So I want you to share, if you're comfortable, what your goal is that you did in your stair steps, and what sources of self-efficacy could help you get to the first step. And then what do you need to do to each next step? So thinking about where can you plug in the sources for your staircase? When do you maybe need help from your mentor or additional mentors? Maybe you don't have a mentor for a particular step, but you're identifying now that you need one. And when do you want feedback along the way? So we're going to take about 10 minutes or so in your small groups to have this conversation. And then we'll see you when you get back. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that was helpful to sort of apply these sources to a particular goal and break it down into smaller steps. Are there any questions about sources before we move on to feedback? Feel free to put in the chat or speak up. Okay, so now we're going to do a case study where we're going to see some feedback that a mentee gets, and we're going to think about how do we maintain sort of confidence or self-efficacy in the face of critique. So I'm going to read this case study aloud. So you've written the first draft of a grant proposal for your mentor. You spent a lot of time working on the proposal and are really pleased with it. You sent it to them for feedback. Now imagine you receive an email from your mentor with this feedback. I've included some edits for grammar and clarity in the document. The proposal needs substantial work before I see it again. You have cited a lot of prior research in the introduction and literature review, but it is disorganized and difficult to follow. I'm not convinced of the importance of this research based on this draft. Once you've made these changes, let me know and I will take another look. So we're going to go back into groups and we'll try and create maybe 2 groups. So there's a few more of you. I know some people dropped off and we're going to chat about this. So how would you feel if this happened to you? Like, what are the emotions? And we talked about sort of the stress levels of seeing that. How would that influence your confidence as you would try to continue working on this grant proposal? How does feedback kind of influence your mentoring relationship? So maybe thinking outside of this case study, how is feedback, the quality of it, the lack of it, how much there is, how is it impacting your mentoring relationship? What are strategies that you use to maintain your confidence in the face of critique? And would you address this feedback with your mentor, and why or not? Why not? So we're going to give you time to chat about this again, and then we're going to come back together. We'll give you about 10 minutes in your groups. And Kevin's going to open those rooms. All right, welcome back. So does anyone want to share either in the chat or coming off mute, sort of what your conversation was like, how this would make you feel, how you would try to maintain some confidence if you received this in your email? Can I get a volunteer to share? You can use the chat if you don't want to speak up. Oh, yeah, Ian.
Yeah, I mean, we heard some really good things in the group about, like what does this feedback look like in the context of the broader mentorship relationship, right? Maybe that influences how it comes across. We talked a little bit about, the importance of addressing when that feedback's not productive or when it's not helpful. That, one, it might depend on your style as a mentee, right? How willing you are to be direct about it. But it came up that maybe this is representative of that advisor needs to know as a mentor if that feedback is helping you, if it is helping you achieve your goals, if it's actually allowing you to do better work, or if it's having some negative effect that giving them the benefit of the doubt they probably didn't intend, but all the same it's having this negative effect. And if they care about being a good mentor, they should be open to receiving that feedback and having that conversation. We also talked a little bit about, maybe they just come across poorly in text. And so it could be that they meant something different, but they phrased it poorly. And so it'd be useful to also set up a meeting to talk about this with the advisor sort of live in person or over Zoom in order to really sort of tease out what the intended feedback was as opposed to the perhaps poor or blunt phrasing that came across in the original version.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful suggestions. I heard sort of giving some feedback to the mentor on their feedback, also sort of showing the impact of that kind of delivery on the mentee, thinking about ways that to set up better conversations about feedback. Maybe email is not the best way with this mentor. So these are really great ideas to be thinking about for improvement, because I think we all acknowledge that would be a hard email to receive. So one thing to know about feedback is that there's different kinds. So I think we all use feedback and we often mean different things. And that's one of the problems with trying to have kind of aligned expectations about what we're looking for and what we want. And so that can lead to disappointment or misunderstandings or frustrations or confusion when we're not getting the feedback we're looking for. So I highly recommend the book, Thanks for the Feedback. It's all about the art of receiving feedback well. And I highly recommend it to everyone in higher ed because there's so much feedback involved in higher ed. And it's difficult, I think, to be constantly getting feedback. So they really define feedback as three different kinds. So there's appreciation, which is sort of that motivation or encouragement. So that social persuasion we were talking about earlier, which we didn't see any of that in the case study, right? And then coaching is sort of the increase in knowledge, skill, capabilities, or growth. So that could have been potentially some of the feedback on the grammar that the mentor mentioned in the case study. And then there's evaluation feedback, which is sort of a rating, a ranking, an assessment, like a grade in a course or on a paper, or your satisfactory, unsatisfactory progress ratings that you might have with your academic progress reports, or your 299 units, or it could be an annual review for postdocs. And I think the mentor in that case study was doing a lot of evaluation of this is not good, essentially, in so many words. This isn't providing new ideas. This isn't, sort of what the level I was expecting, that sort of evaluation feedback. And I think the mentee would expect a lot more encouragement and coaching and not just sort of that kind of evaluation feedback. And so it's really important to be getting all three of these. We definitely need to know if something is not, ready to submit or is not going to get a good grade. That's an important part of our progress. But we also need encouragement and we also need someone to help us kind of build those skills. And so appreciation and coaching are very important. Sometimes what happens, I think, depending on the style of the mentor, is that there can be very little appreciation feedback happening, and mostly evaluation or coaching, which can be really challenging, particularly if you're someone that benefits from a lot of social persuasion. Or sometimes there's mentors that are very encouraging, but maybe you want a little more coaching or you want to know a little more of how you're doing, and they might be doing a little less than you would like. So we give this language to mentors and mentees and hoping that you can have better conversations about the feedback you're looking for. I think if you kind of share the feedback you need, that can help improve the feedback you get back. And also making sure that you are getting all 3 times. Now let's talk about what we do with our confidence when we get criticism. So we had sort of the suggestion already of sort of trying to set up a meeting to get more clarity around the feedback. So a lot of times the feedback we get isn't exactly the feedback that we can address. Sometimes it's very vague and we don't have a lot of details about how to implement it, or there can be a lot of labels or judgments about something, which isn't very constructive. So you can sort of ask questions to try and improve the feedback that you've been given, sort of like, what should I do or say to implement? Can you show me? Can you model it? Can you give me an example? So that's another social modeling technique, particularly if that's useful to you, saying, I'm not understanding, I need an example, or I would like to see you model that, please. And ask for like factual things. Because like I said, a lot of times it's sort of these overall judgments of like, this needs improvement. This isn't ready to submit. This isn't contributing to the field. What does that look like in terms of facts? And what does that look like in terms of things that I could actually do to address it? We really need to get down to particulars there and details and kind of depersonalize all this. Because a lot of the feedback we get is kind of personalized in that way or vague. And so we really have to challenge those that are giving us feedback to enhance the quality of the feedback. Also taking times and breaks. So I think you probably all came up with the idea, if you got that email, maybe it's like taking a break, going for a walk, calling a friend, like doing something to sort of like emotionally regulate. And that's if you have time. I acknowledge that sometimes someone's saying something to your face in the moment, or there could be a deadline and you might be, stretched for time. But really trying to review feedback when you're in the right space and also giving yourself time to sort of digest it are really useful. Look for constructive things. Like I said, sometimes we get a lot of like feedback that doesn't have a lot of constructive elements. Look for what could be constructive, what could be active steps that you could do to clarify. Look for other sources. So immediately go back to your 4 sources. So this is sort of the opposite of social persuasion. So thinking about, okay, let's think about mastery. I wrote a grant proposal. So that's a huge undertaking. That's something I actively did. I'm going to be revising it. So I'm going to be improving and I'm doing it. I'm already doing it. That's an example. Or we talked about going up to like social modeling. Okay, can you show me a grant proposal that is ready to submit? What does that look like? What are the elements that one has that I do not have? Who's also writing a grant proposal or someone who just did that could help me with what they did? Things like that. And then if you're paired with someone like this, whose style is like this, or you're just feeling like it's constant criticism or critique that you're experiencing, it's a really good sign to think about building your network and finding people that can provide social persuasion for you, particularly if you find that helpful and there's a gap. Because encouragement is so useful to having that support and not necessarily trying to change your mentor. It's a good idea to give them feedback, but it's also a good idea to be finding additional mentors that can provide that. And many mentors are, like I said, doing a lot of encouragement. And so they're definitely out there and can be part of your support network as well. One really wonderful quote from this book, again, thanks for the feedback, that I highly recommend. It really like flips and reframes the feedback to think that it's less about you and like how you're not good enough or what you need to do and improve and or your weaknesses, but it tells you a lot about the person giving the feedback. Because they found that a lot of the kind of advice and feedback people give is often autobiographical. So it's a lot of based on sort of the person's giving it their own experience, assumptions, preferences, priorities, and views on how things should be. And so a lot of their feedback is often just really telling you about them and what they value or what they think is important. And so I found this very helpful when thinking about sort of my own feedback and how to understand it. And so also maybe taking time and thinking, okay, what does this feedback tell me about this person? What does it tell me about how they value things, what their priorities are, what kind of mentor they are, what their style is, and feeling like it's less of a judgment of you. And that can help from sort of internalizing this. And that can be the part that's so harmful to our confidence. So I want to summarize just sort of thinking about ways to think about self-efficacy, the sources, but also the feedback, is to think about the sources that work well for you. Share them if you already know them with your mentor. Help your mentor be a better mentor for you. So if they know you're hands-on, you want to just do, and do mastery to learn, that could help you share that with your mentor. So you can say, okay, like I just need to get my hands on this. I don't need to observe for ages. That doesn't work well for me. Let's go. Talk to others and see what they do and what works for them. There's a lot of good ideas in your network. Also be aware of how you cope with different challenges and setbacks. What makes you feel more or less confident, which you thought about earlier. Thinking about, strategies that do help you when you feel a setback. Maybe it's calling that friend, maybe it's going for that walk, maybe it's meeting with a mentor. And, share amongst yourselves, your peer mentors and your mentors, of what they do, because they are also facing challenges. And, we really encourage mentors to normalize that and share their setbacks and challenges too, because that's constant for faculty as well. So having kind of open conversations about that. And thinking about how this feedback is impacting you, finding other mentors, clarifying, getting better feedback, will all help you be more successful. Any questions on self-efficacy or feedback before we switch to independence? Feel free to put in the chat or speak up. No. Okay. So next, we're going to talk about this goal of achieving independence in your mentoring relationship. So that's the goal of every mentoring relationship, is to sort of gain independence in the field, to be growing in your career stages. And it's really important to have conversations with your mentor about what independence looks like for the both of you and how you're kind of progressing. So you should be evolving and changing in the relationship as you go along. And there are different phases for mentorship. So this is a framework to sort of have you think about what stage you might be at and how you're going to be moving forward. So in the beginning, it's sort of you're deciding to work together and what that could look like. So that could have been at recruitment or your first year in grad school or while you were applying for a postdoc position. Then you're kind of negotiating. This is where we're aligning expectations. Okay, how's this going to work? When are we meeting? What do you expect me to do? How do we communicate? So this is really getting to know each other. And this can be happening throughout your years together as you're, doing different goals, different milestones. You might be renegotiating every year. And then cultivating is sort of, you've had those conversations. Now we're just relationship building. We're meeting, we're working together, collaborating, working on our goals and our projects. And at the end, there should be, this growth and independence we talked about, that goals should be met. And there's going to be this transition because this time is ended and you're going to decide what the next steps look like for your relationship. So after you graduate or finish your postdoc position, how do you want to engage? What does that look like? Some people are like, I'm done. No need to contact me. Some people are like, I would love to stay in touch. I want to continue collaborating on projects, and they're very connected to their mentors still. So kind of having conversations about what that would look like, what sponsorship you might need. So what are ways that you want them to advocate for you, maybe for a job or future research. So thinking about what you would want and kind of having a conversation with your mentors as that ends. So one problem I often see with mentors and mentees is that they're not a shared understanding of what independence is and what it looks like. So a lot of faculty will say, I want my grad students and postdocs to be independent. And I often am like, okay, well, what does that mean? Or what does that look like to you? And then they reflect and can maybe articulate that to me, but they often haven't shared that with their mentees explicitly. So I think that's helpful. So put in the chat sort of, what do you think independence looks like in grad school or in a postdoc position? What does it mean to you? At the beginning, experiments should be planned together, and at the end of grad school, the student should be designing leading experiments on their own. So working together and then leading on your own. And I'm curious how many of you were explicitly told any of this, or you've observed it, or maybe have some of your own understanding about your expectations for grad student. So being able to execute everyday tasks and make progress on your own, make decisions on your own, take initiative to network and workshops independent of the take workshops independent of the advisor. Wonderful. So here are some examples we thought of. So there's sort of this examples of independence in research, which we heard was sort of the experiments. And I see the chat is being added to, so please check those out as well. So here are some ideas of sort of what it could look like research. It would definitely vary by your field, but be able to have advanced knowledge, know the literature, be able to do a research project, be able to write a thesis or dissertation, or be published, be able to communicate about your research, are all sort of some common things as part of graduate school and postdoc positions. But also, what does that look like in relation, right, to independence from another person? So for that relationship is, here are some ideas of what that could look like. It could be having sort of your own ideas, timelines and plans. So, being able to come up with your own topics, being able to independently figure out what an achievable plan and timeline would be for that. Maybe needing less guidance, so not needing help as much. Also, this feeling more confident to act, because I also meet a lot of first year kind of folks that sometimes are like, I'm not sure when I'm supposed to ask for permission and what I can sort of do. And I think as you gain independence, you get more confident about sort of what you have authority to do. Being able to troubleshoot or solve your problems on your own, or at least to a first attempt. Also, having really strong collaboration skills where you don't need this like mediator or like network support, like someone connecting you or helping you work with others, being able to do that on your own. And then what a lot of faculty share with me is that they really want their students and postdocs to become their colleagues. And we know you might be going into different careers, but I think in terms of intellectually, they want to have sort of this more of a peer relationship where there's, they're being challenged and dialogue about the research. And many see that as their goal. So I wanted to put that here since I've heard it time and time again, of like they really see themselves at the end wanting to have more of like a peer relationship with their mentees. So I want you all to get back in your small groups and think about, how is independence defined when working for a mentor, especially if you're working on research together. That always complicates things if you are doing the same research project. If your research is tied into their grant funding, there's lots of ways this can kind of get muddled. You all are from different disciplines, so thinking about what that looks like in your discipline. You're also working with very different people, so different mentoring styles, and how that independence can look different. And then, do you know how your mentor defines independent? Do you know what your mentor expects for your independence? Have you had this conversation? And what are your experiences so far in trying to gain independence? So we're going to take about 10 more minutes and then we'll come back. So to summarize some strategies, since we're talking about mentoring up, sort of what can you do to work with your mentor on your independence, is talk about the shared definition of independence. Make sure you're aligned on what that looks like, and you hear from them. And even maybe just clarify, what phase of mentoring phase are you in, and share those with them. They probably have never seen those before. And talk about sort of what the next few phases look like. And think about those milestones that you still need to meet to get independence, set goals for those, timeline those, make a plan together to get to the independence that you defined. And talk to others, other peers, other mentors that you have in your network, to think about ways to achieve independence. I see a message in the chat. Yes, thank you all for engaging today. I did want to get to your question, Christina, just sort of how do you change the culture around having conversations like these about sort of the human aspects? This is very difficult, right? Like changing the culture around mentorship, I can speak since it's my role, is challenging, but there's a lot of work to be done. So I want to acknowledge that can be difficult, and especially in a power dynamic. I think some ideas is, I always say, use grad studies as like the excuse, or feel free to use me. Say, I took this workshop, I learned these new things. That's a really easy way to bring things up or introduce them. It's just sort of, say, grad studies shared this, and I thought it was interesting. I wanted to share it with you, these ideas or these phases or these tools. The other thing is to manage up. So in mentoring relationships, you have a lot to offer as a mentee, and part of that could be improving sort of the culture of mentorship in your program, in your mentoring relationship, as you are able. And I'm free to meet with any of you if it's particularly challenging working with a particular mentor or a particular program's culture. Meet with me so we can go into like specifics and think about what's realistic. But we talked about like ways to manage up and clarify feedback so you're getting better feedback. We talked about, ways to introduce, some of these mentoring plans or practices as the mentee. And that can be a way to sort of influence the culture from your position. So I hope that's helpful. There are some more resources on the last slide. I'm happy to stay on and chat with any additional questions. But thank you so much for joining, and I hope today was helpful. We will send out these slides and handouts to you as well. Thank you so much.